working for at the spiral. So we're looking at this sort of and I mean, this is a lovely image because you've got this sort of geometric pattern of the tiles and so forth coming in already, which is sort of like a pattern element that we could exploit later. And also we've got this sort of folding round of this sort of, it's lovely how you've got these very straight lines and yet there's this sort of very curved kind of feel, you know, sort of coming around it. So we're going to use some of these soft kind of, because we've been doing some very bright colours, so we're going to use some soft kind of sandy colours and just try and create this spiral and then really just have fun with sort of bringing patterns kind of round this spiral, because it does give us a chance to show how you can just very gently change the size and perspective of your kind of drawings and to give you this sort of sense of things moving down. You know, lovely bit of perspective work. So to begin with, I'm not going to make my paper particularly wet. I'm going to do a very small amount of painting. Well, it's a relatively small amount of painting. I don't want to do loads. I just want to give us something to start with. So I'm going to start with some ochre kind of colour, sort of ochre-y yellow. And I'm kind of like just getting a wet brush and flicking it over the two colours I want to use, which luckily are next door to each other. So I'm just going to see what that kind of gives me on my brush. And if I look at the spiral, I've got a big spiral line kind of coming through that way, like a sort of diagonal like that. So I'm just painting that on, and my brush is splitting and it's got this sort of nice drag kind of effect of the paint, and that's fine. I like a little bit of that. So I've got that kind of shape, which is a long sort of diagonal going across the top, and then I come around a little corner. And again, just dipping my paint into the brush into the paint to see what that I can pick up. And then I'm going to come down this side. So if I don't get a lot of mark coming out first time round, I'm just starting to kind of prepare it. There we go. So I can just come around that side. So I've got this sort of, I want to call it elbow shape. It's not really an elbow shape. It's like an upside down L sort of, isn't it? And then I can take that down into my space. So I've sort of like got this internal space here, which is going to be my sort of going down. I'm just going to bring my line a little bit thicker across that way because I've got plenty of lines kind of coming round. And on this side here, I'm now going to just paint a little bit more so that this line is slightly more of a wedge shape because it's got that sort of turning. Because we actually see more of a kind of wedge, so that means just that sort of shape. And I've just managed to dip the edge of the brush into a paint, and it's given me a nice sort of ochre-y kind of edge there. So it's just folding, the shape is kind of folding round. And where it goes down under here, you can see how it's slightly darker than the bit going over the top. So I'm going to get a little bit more colour on my brush and just darken up this edge here. I'm going to put the edge of my brush to that side and then sweep some paint back that way so that I want to build that edge up a bit more. That doesn't look darker. It seems to, I think the light has just changed outside. We may have got a break of sunlight through the window, so I'm just going to drop my curtain. There we go, but it's not dark enough yet, so I'm going to put a bit more paint onto that edge just to try and get that point where this goes under, put the brush on and just sweep it back from that point, because I want that to be definitely darker. I might add some more. I'm going to have to keep adding a bit more tone onto that, so I want to get that darker like that, just so it's starting to get me a sense of sort of going round and down. That's what I'm looking for, really. And there's a little bit more darkness up in this corner here. I just tilt up a tiny bit, so just up on this section, so I can just put a little bit of darker tone kind of coming in around there. So that's what I've got, this sort of shape turning down and going down and round. So that's with my very big brush. So I want to add a little bit more detail with the paint, so I'm going to put my very big brush down, and I'm going to go for the sort of square end again if I can find it. Why is it always, every time I turn around, they've hidden themselves from me? I was hoping I could get a bigger one. Oh, I've got a small one. That will have to do. Where have you gone, you naughty brush? Right, so I've got this sort of size brush. I think they do. They conspire against me sometimes when they're not feeling it. You know, they want to have a day off. They go and hide. Right, so we've got quite sort of, again, this edge here, I want to just get a little bit more strength into that. So I'm just putting a line down where that is going to come under. Now, using that sort of ochre-y colour, just to sort of give that a bit more strength. And I like these sort of rays that the steps almost give us, almost like sort of sunburst somehow. So I'm going to just bring some of those in stripes, I guess. Not making them very, very strong, but just in that ochre colour again, and just using that brush stroke to get like some idea of these sort of steps moving round. So I'm not trying to draw a picture of the staircase, although it would be a lovely thing to draw, and you know, but by using this it's the same colour as it were on the background, but by just using a smaller brush and slightly more concentrated version, then you get this structure in, but it's not too strong, and we're just going to help that define that edge. And they've just sort of slightly splayed out, haven't they, like sort of the rays of a sun. And then there's a big sort of square in the corner, which we're going to leave for the moment, and then I'm going to come around again up in this side. So we're trying to get the feeling of a staircase, or the sense of something going down and around, without getting into drawing architectural details, because we just want to get that feeling of descent or ascent, depending on how you see it. You know, are you going up your staircase? Are you going down? You know, so, and then as I come around this corner, they sort of, don't they, sort of radiate more in a kind of fan out like that, sort of coming round, so they're turning the corner in sort of segments like that. And then when I've got this section up here, we have got, you can just about see the steps kind of coming round. If you imagine the balustrade was gone and they would continue round that way. So I think I'm going to continue them, so I want them to get some sort of here to here where they're sort of overlapping. So we're going to bring these lines carrying around, all working in this sort of, it's funny how it's although it's a yellow, it feels like quite a cool colour, doesn't it? It doesn't feel like a sort of hot sunshine yellow. It's, the ochre is quite a sort of earthy tone, so it's quite a different feel. So just imagine that balustrade is not there, and I can just bring these lines kind of coming along, and as they come this way, they're going to slightly space out a bit more, because when something is closer to you, you can see more of the space between them. It's bigger. As they go away, they look a bit smaller. And if you haven't got that exactly working, you can always go back down to this sort of bit down here and just put a few more lines in. So where there's more lines or more controlled kind of paint, it gives you a closer together effect. It gives you a bit more darkness, and hopefully it's starting to look like this is sort of transmitting over, this is travelling over the top of this section here. So that's kind of, so we've got the sort of staircases in there. So I want to put some indication that there is sort of balustrades here. Not that I'm worried about anyone falling out, but once I've got these sort of steps in, I can go back and take, I want to kind of bring this up here, but if I use that same colour, just pausing there because I'm just thinking, if I use the same colour, it's going to change a bit. So I need to change a slight colour palette. I think I want to get, I'm going to mix some of that ochre with a tiny hint of greyish watercolour. So it's got a slightly muckier colour. It may end up looking slightly greenish, but I just want to get a slightly deeper tone of that ochre, I think. And then I'm going to take, no, I'm pausing because I like that, and I don't want to spoil it with what I was going to do. So I'm going to slow down. Hang on, I'm going to slow down. I'm actually going to, I'm just thinking, no, I don't want to do that right now. What I'm going to do is this banister. I want to just think of this shape of the banister kind of coming around. That's what I want to do. That's what I'm seeing really. So I'm going to take this as an edge round there. So just with that slightly darker, russety kind of tone. Just to continue with that sort of sliding round, but it doesn't quite follow the stairs because you see a bit of, you see it's very tight to the stairs on that edge, and then it comes up doesn't it? It travels through that space there, and then it's going to come up and kind of almost away at its own spiral, kind of, yes, that's better, like sort of coming through there. So I'm getting this spiral happening, but they're working on a slightly different plane. So I'm quite liking that more, that's better, yes. That's sort of geometric. Because what I'm going to think I'm going to do is eventually I might use some white pen to indicate some of the balustrades. So because they're kind of white on the top. This is the joy of white pens. Right, so now I've got a sort of shape, I've got that sort of this feeling, hopefully, of kind of things moving around. Now what's interesting is if we look at the hollow in the middle of like the floor where it's farther down, it's obviously quite a lot of darkness, and we know instinctively that those tiles are white or very creamy coloured, but they're actually darker in tone, aren't they, than the sort of stairwell that goes round it. So I'm going to use blue colours into that centre, or much bluer colours. But the first thing I'm going to do, because the blue is cooler and it's going to recede, so cooler colours tend to kind of push back and they look like the depths. The first thing I'm going to do is just paint all of this sort of, it's not a square, is it? It's a parrot, it's some sort of weird geometric shape. I'm going to paint all of this in a blue. So it's a grey blue, it's just, and this is just like putting an underlayer in, and it's going to give me a shadow effect, because if I get all of this into blue, straight away that already looks like it's further back. And then any colours that I put over the top of it, or anything I want to work over the top of it, is going to be already got an element of shadowing in it. It's sort of like, I say, it's like a sort of undercoat. This sort of thing works really well if you're painting people. You can use tones of lilac and purple to kind of underpaint first, to paint your shadows in, and then let that dry, and then paint the sort of flesh tone, whether it's Afro-Caribbean flesh tone or Caucasian flesh tone or anything in between, and it then automatically gives this sort of shadowing kind of feel, and when you work the colours on top, you get that sense of shadow working really well. So now when I come back to that, I can use my ready, there's sort of like a sort of brick red kind of colour, isn't there, in there, where there's like some sort of seating, I think. So I can use that just to come in around here, and it's already sort of darker and a bit more pushed back because it's got that blue tone under it. So I'm going to darken that down so that becomes the red colour straight away. I think that's too orangey, so I need to go into a cooler, more like a sort of burnt umber kind of colour. Come on, where's my burnt sienna? Because I need to get some darkness into that, because it's going to be disappearing off. I don't want too many drips, but I'm going to get a drip. Oh well, we're going to work with it because we're doing abstract, aren't we? So it's fine. There we go. So let's get that, and actually I'm quite liking that now. So that's happened. Yeah, so that's quite sort of dark in there, and then I've used a burnt umber. That's all right. And then just some more grey tones. Just want to build up in here so it's darker. I quite like that sort of dramatic sort of. Let's put some more of that. I'm liking that sort of like moving across into that space. So then I can use a little bit of the very watered down umber just into that section to kind of get some darkness into that. So this is becoming the kind of, we talk about a stairwell, don't we? We talk about a stairwell from as if we are looking down, right down into the depths. It's the same kind of idea. So that's kind of darken that round there. And I quite like the way that if you look tonally, the banister that goes round is not too far tonally from the sort of area in here. So as we're thinking of a more abstract composition, I'm going to bring some of that into certainly this part of the stairwell, of the sort of banister, sort of, I mean, it's not really the banister, it's kind of the mark inspired by, because that's got some shading into it. And I quite like that just coming in round there. And then I now want to get a little bit more darkness into some of these sort of like treads that we've marked in. So I'm going to use some grey blues again, just to bring these rays out. So we've got somewhere to start. And then we've nearly finished, and we're going to do some kind of pen work following some of these lines going round to get this shape to sort of twist and turn maybe a little bit of more bluey shadow up in some of these. Push these round. And it's got this nice feel of things kind of moving round. And we've got sort of, hopefully, we've got a kind of composition. Our eyes being drawn very much this sort of dark centre here. I've got these ripples happening, which I quite like, even though I didn't intend them, but now I see them, I do like them. And I'm going to bring a little bit of definition through these steps, and that's kind of going to be it now. I just want to put a bit more dark on that edge where it's curling round, because it's disappearing underneath, and I want that shadow, I want that feeling that it's disappearing into there. Right, so then it's time to hit the hairdryer just to take the moisture off that, and then we can get some pen work onto it and get some patterning going. Okay, so I'm going to mute while I grab my hairdryer. Again, if you want to grab yours, and I will come back as soon as mine is lovely and dry. Right, well, that didn't take long because we haven't absolutely soaked the paper today, so it's not been too kind of dramatically damp and wet. So this is the point where I kind of like have to move the photo away, because otherwise you get into too much like trying to look like the photo, and that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to give this, we want to make this look like things are folding down and around themselves. So we're just thinking about how we can get distance into that. So I'm going to start off with I'm going back to some basically black pens today. So I'm going to start with a sort of medium-sized one. As I always say, if you start off with a medium size, then you can go bigger and you can go smaller. If you go straight in with one sort of too chunky, then you kind of got nowhere to go with it. As a general rule, you can always break these rules. There's only just suggestions, as ever. I'm just trying to find one that's slightly more. I've got a 0.3, which is sort of gives, again, it does give me somewhere else to go. So I want to do some quite sort of graphic lines with this. So I'm just going to start by drawing in quite boldly where these shapes are going to go, and I'm just going to follow my edge. Again, just moving it through, but that's definitely want to get that this is a very strong kind of border in this picture. You've got this very strong, because this is my top section, this is my underneath section, so I want to get that line in, establishing it really nice and firmly. And same with these banisters, just bring them through and round and curling them over. So we're getting this lovely folding sense. Of everything kind of like coming round on itself. So we've got that area, got that feeling of it moving round. And then I'm going to get some of these rays in. So they're sort of like, they're based on the sort of edges of the steps, but they're just kind of portions and areas of the painting. And I'm just picking out the ones that I feel I want to, I can experiment with later. So sometimes they're closer together, sometimes they're a bit further apart. Just sort of getting them into, got this strong kind of geometric feel going. So we've got quite a strong, we're referencing the kind of architecture that we came from. So I've got these nice spokes, just picking up on that edge of the brush where it came through, because that gives us kind of a guideline to work to. And then when I've got these sections here with this line, I'm going to take it down to the banister and then let it travel underneath. So you see that straight away, that's starting to, I get the camera to come up a little bit, you can see, sorry, it doesn't come up high enough as my board does. It's shorter than what it needs to be. So you can see that by bringing that line through and behind the banister, that's straight away giving me sort of different layering kind of effect. So I can bring this one up, and then when I hit the banister, lift the pen up and then put it down again, and that's going to take that line behind so that you've got that sense of folding round. That's it. And we're going to come through in these sort of stripe areas, taking those through. I haven't continued the banister at the moment. I quite like that, just to then suddenly be a bit fainter. Don't know why, just do. So let's just bring these sort of striped areas, and again as they go up they're further apart, so hopefully they give us a sort of sense of it opening up. So that should hopefully really sort of enhance that feeling of things sort of cumbling. I'm trying to say tumbling down and coming down, and it became cumbling down, which is my new word of the week, I think. I quite like that. Right, so then we've got this sort of dark area down here, so I'd like to make this quite a sort of contrasting, or make it sort of different to what's happening up here. So I'm going to pick out my areas of paint again, but then I think I'm going to get some really nice patterns going in here. So this is going to become quite, this bit I want to be quite organic in feel, because then it's a contrast to this more geometric kind of architectural thing that's going on at the top. So I'm just going to start putting in some patterning into the sort of lighter area. So I'm just doing circles at the moment, just fitting into that dribble that's got there, and then some of them I'm going to echo. So I do a circle and then just do some like rainbow lines coming through. So again, another sort of circle, and then copy that round a few times just to kind of give that, and it almost looks a bit like when you drop a pebble into water, you get that sort of echo, don't you, kind of moving up through. So let's put some more of those, and some can just have a couple, and then some might have a few more sort of spraying out from them. And then I'm going to bring some S shapes kind of curling through that. I'm thinking sort of organic shape, something growing, something moving, water maybe there's like a flood of happening in the bottom. So again, some more of those kind of just moving, and I've got some nice ripples in that sort of pale grey paint that I can just follow round with some of them. There's a nice one here, look, there's a lovely kind of watermark there, so I can bring that, and it's got to behave, it's got to take notice of the outlines that we've given it. So when it hits one of these edges, it's got to stop straight away because it's very much down at the bottom. So once you've got a wiggly line in, then you can do a circle into some of those shapes, and then come back with those arcs that just echo that and kind of refract it round. Let me come in a little bit closer into that middle section so you can kind of see what I'm doing. So yeah, I'm just sort of feeling all these kind of watery shapes in kind of contrast to what is going to be much more geometric upstairs, and bringing in just some of these swirls and curls, just letting them flood and move around. And it's always just that sense of, if you bring them closer together, then they're going to add some tone as well as pattern onto the surface. So they're not just making a pattern, they're also making that pattern darker. So let's see if we take them onto the burnt umber kind of side. If I draw them again, sort of going just a bit closer, so they're light, that there's less gap showing through, that's going to make that really deep and dark. And just these sort of overlapping like seashell shapes, or maybe that sense you get when you see lava that's sort of dried on the surface. It creates these sort of weird like sort of ripply surfaces, something quite fossily. So I can bring a big circle in, and then I'm drawing, and I'm sort of like, I'm trying to kind of draw the same shape, but I'm not managing each time because I'm not, and I actually want that little level of not repetition, because then that gives me a much freer kind of effect on it. So I sort of like pretend I'm trying to copy it, and then I don't. And let's put a little bit more light on, just see if that will just illuminate that top section a bit better for you. There we go. So I can just then bring all these shapes and sort of try and then allow the sort of bumpiness of the paper to kind of slightly throw off your pen and kind of get the textures going. And I love it when you do the lines and they're disappearing off underneath, because they're going off into a world that's sort of down in this crevice, and by taking your patterns and then just deliberately butting them up to the edge of that space, it helps the eye kind of carry on. So if I do it on this brighter section, you might see it, I can be certain to see it then. So if you do your kind of like these sort of loops that come around, then it sort of gives this sense that this pattern is continuing down below, so you've got that feeling of depth and distance, and that there's something, a world carrying on beneath the sort of the yellow section or the ochre section, and it just helps to kind of locate it in space in a strange kind of way. So I think what would be great would be to keep on building up this section in here, and I'm going to get some white pen as well, I think, to add into that, because I think it will give it a kind of highlight. So again, I'll probably keep working much more on this, but I just wanted to use some of this to show you kind of if it's going to work for me today. He's obviously, this one's sulking and not having it at all today. Let's try and find one that's not going to sulk. They are temperamental, much as I love white pens. Let's try this one. You hear me scrabbling it to get it going on a piece of paper. Right, let's see if this will work on here. It was working a second ago. Just sort of bring in some highlights of different colour into that one. No, this one doesn't want to work on this one either, but I've got some nice gel pens and they might play ball if they're in the right mood. Art materials can be quite stroppy at times. So this is just like a peachier colour, which I'm hoping is going to show up a little bit, and just adding some more different dimensions of colour into those swirls. You can see it as they come across these sort of blue areas, so then you can start echoing the shapes that you've got in the black pen. You can bring the kind of these veins of colour through, and then they start to maybe look a bit like cross section of rock or crystals or something like those lovely quartzes you get sections of. Moving through. Like that is coming through, and then again, if you've got a chance to get your metallics out, and then you can bring in some of those as well, just to sort of just following those swirling patterns and letting them move and kind of swim in this sort of tidal section that's happening underneath. And I think it would be really lovely to build this up and keep on adding in detail till this becomes really kind of intense and has a lot of colours. And I actually really like just using this. This is a gel pen, and it's again from my Wondrous Cheap and Cheerful set that I think was about sort of £5 for 30. It's on special offer somewhere, and it's proven to be really useful. But I've used this colour. This is sort of like it's got a metallic in it, so it's slightly goldy or coppery, and it's sort of picking up on the shades that are going on above. But again, because you've got the blue underneath it as a kind of foundation, it just helps to still make that a bit shadier, and it just gives it a bit more sense of darkness, but yet that hint of colour, that sort of yellowy ochre colour in here, is picking up on what's happening upstairs, so it stops the two sections from being completely unrelated. They do have a kind of feeling that they can go together. So as you can see, we can do it. Just is a very, very simple shapes. They're just half moon shapes, swirly shapes, circles with sort of echoes drawn around them. Just draw a few echoes, and not being able to draw them exactly like each other is what gives them its charm, is what makes it work. You know, if you could draw them all so they're identical, it would be fairly tedious. So it's that lovely hand-drawn quality that sort of comes through here. So I'm going to put a few more black lines in, but see, already hopefully you've got this sort of very different feeling of this sort of very different underneath building up. Oh, that's a brush pen, that's not the one I want. Where's my pen gone? Here we go, this is quite a nice one. Right, so then I get into this sort of darker section. I want to get some more texture and lines moving. And just sort of imagine all this sort of swirling movement that's going on, and see if you can sort of explore some of the little shapes that have appeared in between and fit some little ovals kind of inside. And it's got like a sort of tree barkish feel as well going on in there. There's sort of that element of it too, which is quite appropriate for these lovely polished sort of banisters. So we've got so there, you know, if you get too big a space or something, you know, throw in some circles and then try and get your lines to kind of wiggle round the circles, give them something to work round, so they're kind of climbing over the furniture, as it were, to kind of get in and get things going, to get a shape happening. So and you can just sort of go off into infinity to go smaller and smaller and smaller into a shape, and that also gives you a kind of darkness, doesn't it? It gives you that sort of shadowing. So if you want to start getting some different textures in or some different notes of shadow, you can think, well, maybe I want to get some more darkness in down here. So lots of lines closely drawn together, you know, and then almost on top of each other, just to give that sort of darker moment. And I'm just going to bring some of these into the corners and have them coming off the corners so they're moving. So hopefully you've got this kind of swirling, slightly magical, maybe, down belowness happening down here. So we've got this sort of depth. And then I want to then think about a little bit. It's like I can always come back and we can always add some more into here to kind of really push that along. But we should just think about the stairs in a minute as well, of how they're going to go. Right, so we've got, let me just come in really close and you can see this is the kind of texture that I'm getting on this sort of central bit. So you've got these always sort of interlocking, like interswirling kind of bits moving together in a couple of colours. And then if I come back from that, so you've got this sort of interior space now happening. And then, I don't know, look, mine seems to be creeping over into the upper world as well. So I might just draw around that and give it a little, you know, as if it's sort of moving into that sort of space, lifting itself up, I don't know. Right, so let's think about some of the work we could do on these sort of lower sections here. So thinking about this sort of like sprays kind of rays effect. We can also use a kind of travelling line to kind of come down these, but if we break the line, then it starts to kind of give this sort of steps feel. So I'm going to just try, I'm going to come a line all the way from the top here. So because I'm going for the top, when I say top, I mean the bottom right hand corner. So I'm going to bring a line along, and then when it hits one of these lines, it's very straight, but I'm going to move it to the side by a couple of millimeters, so it's not directly connected. And then that starts to give you maybe that feel of it moving through the space but dropping down each time onto a stair. And then when I come round to this corner here, I'm going to come up and I'm going to follow that bend. That's it, to get round the corner. So you've got that sort of dropping, but if you look, again, if I swing the camera around, you can see how the lines are not actually meeting up, that they're just a millimetre to the side of each other each time, and that kind of like continues that sense of it being a step or something dropping round. So again, on this one, I can come across the top and then it disappears underneath that corner, and then it's going to this bit here, which is quite brightly lit at the moment, so I'm just going to spin my light down. So I'm going to imagine that it's coming round and it's appeared here, just in that tiny triangle up there, and then it's coming down and around, and again this line is jumping down each step that we come to, and then on this corner it's going to turn the corner and it's going to come again down, and it's sort of almost like there's a certain spider web quality to it, I think, of like, and then finally it's going to disappear under that line there. So I've got that sort of tracing all the way around. So I'm going to do a few more of those to kind of get this, again, this sort of spiral happening. So again, each one just slightly broken every time it hits an edge. Every time it meets a horizontal line, it's going to slightly jump a couple of millimeters round, and then it goes around the bends And we can bring that round, and we're going to use this as a sort of starting point to build some other patterns and things on. And as it comes round again, here we go. So it's really enhancing that spiral kind of feel. It's making it sort of really drawing that sort of direct spiral across the piece. And it doesn't have to always break in the same. You can always jump it up in different sides. I think that works too. So it's almost like there's a carpet running around, or a sort of pattern kind of coming through. And then again, we take this down. And also what this is giving us is it's giving us kind of like a grid, because the grid is appearing with these sort of squares. And then when you're thinking about creating pattern work, you've got a square then that you can kind of like, instead of like trying to fill the whole thing with design, you've got a little area that you can work on, and you can fill your design in. And as it's kind of moving round and changing shape, then your design, if it follows that kind of pattern, can start doing the same sort of thing. It's quite a useful way of getting your patterns to change like that. And then I'm going to bring a few more in lower down, just in the sort of lower down section, so you can see that sort of continuing that spiral round. So I'm just going to bring a couple more, but just in this lower section, and because I want to get them slightly tighter and closer together in this section, because as it goes away from us, then obviously it's going to get smaller, so, and more dense and more tightly packed. So I'm going to bring a couple more just as if they were just coming from, where am I going to take them? I think from around sort of about here. So they're starting to get more intense, and the squares that we're dealing with are going to get smaller and smaller as they go down, because there's that sort of spiralling downwards. So we've almost got like tiles kind of moving down, but they're sort of changing in size. And I think to really enhance that, I'm going to put a few more stripes in this as we get down nearer to the bottom edge. So these ones are getting smaller and smaller as they're going round. And then in this last section, as they get really tight into this sort of disappearing point, again, I'm going to break them up. I've gone straight across, I didn't mean to do that, but I'm going to break them up again, so we're getting really small squares by the time we get into this edge where it's disappearing down. And this is sort of like a grid that we can start working into. I say we've got for this quite geometric feel for this upper section. Right, so hopefully you can see, if I come back a little bit, we've really added to this feeling of things spiraling round. And I might just put, I think I want to put another spoke kind of coming in there. And so we've almost got like this slightly spider web kind of feel kind of coming round to these sort of areas, and the background is giving us all these lovely sort of colours to work on. So if we were to look at come in, so what's quite nice is we can look at here. Now obviously there's a lot of squares here, and you don't have to do them all, but we can think about pattern fitting into these sort of squares, and we're going to try and fit sort of similar ideas of pattern into these sort of squares and see how they sort of translate as they go smaller and smaller. So what I want to do is, again, it's going to be simple pattern because we don't want to give ourselves too much to think about. We've got enough going on as it is. So I'm going to pick a wider pen, a heavier pen for up here, thicker pen, I think that's the word actually I want. So I'm going to pick a 0.8, which is sort of relatively heavy in the micron liners department. And I'm going to take a corner off of a square like that, and then do this echoing thing again. I want it to be slightly spikier because it's the more geometric section of the world that we're creating. So I'm going to take some geometric lines kind of moving through like that. So we're thinking of kind of a rocky kind of feel maybe. And so just get that into that sort of complete square. And initially that's all you need to do. And you can again decide if you want to come back later and do more sort of work. So then you can take the next one, but the important thing is the next one, I don't want it to join up. So where the lines come, they're going to stay sort of broken, you know. I don't want them to meet each other, so the pattern doesn't translate across from one side to the other. It's definitely in a kind of its own individual broken line like that. So as we come down, they're all slightly mismatched, and you can get some stripes in, and still think about how, you know, when they come close together, they're darker. So look, on this darker area here, this edge here, you might want to bring your lines in so they come down to each, you know, they come, I'll get some words in a minute, they come tighter together over that darker, stronger brush stroke. So you've got a point to kind of gather them into, so that they've got that feeling of, like, you know, they're using that painting shadow that you've given yourself. So where we've got that extra bit of paint, we get some more lines in and they become sort of tighter. So again, on this one, when I bring them down, I'm going to spread them out towards the paler end and then pack them in closer together on that dark edge, but still just trying to keep each one like a sort of broken section, or not totally disconnected, but disjointed. That's the word I'm after. I want to keep that disjointed feel so that we get that sense of steps still, even though they're not a drawing of steps, we kind of know that there's that progression going downwards. So they're going to keep going down, and you can choose a different edge. I seem to be sort of drawn to having, I think because I'm working with the brush stroke, you're getting the deeper or the tighter packed lines towards the leading edge of each tile. I think that's working quite well again to give that sense of them moving downwards through space, because they're getting a sort of flow and a direction kind of moving through. So although it seems like a lot of tiles, they fill up quite quickly, and you know, you can leave this as much as this. You can go back later and do more kind of pattern work. So I'm going to sort of like dot around and come back to bits so that you can see, kind of get more of a feel of, I think if I take, what I'm going to do is take this sort of outside edge one all the way round, and then hopefully you'll get a sense of this transition or this sort of feel of spiralling that we're building up. So I'll go to this tile next, that's got a slightly darker section in that top corner there. So I'm just going to concentrate my fire, as it were, into that top corner. And they're just really simple, slightly broken zigzaggy lines. You could do wiggly lines, you could do dead straight geometric lines. It depends what you feel. I just think you want to have something that contrasts to the kind of sea water kind of section down below in the dark. So then this one, this is quite a neutral tile. It doesn't have any particular definition. It's because it's all sort of roughly the same colour. So I'm just going to have them going forwards and kind of meeting up to that edge there. And then in contrast, this one is all really quite dark, the one next to it. So lots of lines packed in, just allowing that paint to guide me again. So then this section is going to have lots of lines, and they're all going to be radiating towards that sort of central point there. And you can see how that kind of draws the eye, and it gives it a direction and a movement, sort of moving down. And then we're going to come down to this sort of step here, again quite a bit more open, so maybe almost straight lines, not so much tight packing because it's quite light, but that then gives it a different character to this one. And this one, now I've got the corner, because this is going around the corner, I can see I've got some dark there and then dark on that side, so I can bring my lines together, then space them out a bit and bring them back round, and that's going to help me translate round into the corner. And what I'm also feeling is, now that I've got round this point, I need to change my pen, because this is my larger pen, and somehow I can feel straight away that this, as I go around the corner with it, it's too big a size nib for going down. So I've gone far enough as I can with the 8.8 nib, so I'm going to swap down to a 0.5, and I'll swap again as I go down. So as I go down, these lines are going to be drawn with a finer and finer pen. So let's come round so we can look at this corner here. And then, so now my lines, again, trying each time not to let them match up so that they don't run into the lines that have gone before, just so that we can keep that sense of difference between the layers. And that becomes quite challenging after a while because you get more and more lines moving around. It's quite good fun trying to find the untrodden path, as it were, the ones that don't match up. And it starts to look like you've got a feeling in here of sort of wood grain as well, and the sort of polished wood steps again, even though it's not trying to be a totally representational drawing. And then as I come around to this with a lovely dark section here, so I can bring my lines into that very dark section. And if I want to exaggerate that effect, have fewer lines more open at the start, and then really squash them in tight together into that dark bit to add some shadow. So we've gone around the corner, so you can see how our lines are they're sort of flowing around the corner, and then we're going to come around to this side. So imagine that we've got quite a long step here. Looking at it, I think I might just put another division in just there. I think that step was too long, and obviously you can totally edit and change the shapes that you've got. They don't have to be set in stone. This side, the darker is on the other side, so my lines are going to move backwards. They're going to move up into that section. I can just see a little bit of it poking out under that sort of banister bit like that. But then here we're back onto heading towards that edge. So moving through like that. And a fairly neutral stair there. So I'm just going to bring a few lines moving through. And on this one again, this one is facing backwards, as it were. So I can just put them closer in and then move them round. So again, it's just these lines flowing all the way around this shape, and it's because you've got this structure in place, it's a way we can guide and you can build up your surface, and it's all the time making this spiral become more and more intricate and more gives it more and more movement and more flow round. And then I'm down onto this section now. And as I get round the bend, I'm probably going to change down my pen size again. Now, ideally, I would probably, if I was doing this sort of on my own, as it were, I would kind of do all of these in, and then do all of these in sections rather than going down in a line like this. But I thought it would sort of show you the way that's going to flow and the way we're going to get that build up of movement. So let's just take this one. Can have just a few lines because I want to keep it light, but this is a lovely one to do because you've got this sort of dark on both sides, so we can get the lines close together and then fade them out. And after this row I'm going to change pen size, so there we go. I can pack them in tight and then let them move apart and then bring them back round again. That's it, and tuck them under. So the closer together you draw them, the more shade and the more darkness you bring, and then you move them apart and they let more light in, don't they? They let more paper show through. So let's just move them all together. Right, so now let's go and change onto a finer pen. They've also got a feeling, I think, a bit of like tiger skin or something. There's quite a sort of animal pelt feel as well, sort of, I think, because you've got these stripes going over this darker surface, which is quite fun. So then I can just bring in, and by immediately changing into the finer pen, my drawing is finer. The impact is that the lines are further away, and it starts to give me more depth and this sense of the spiral going down and round. And you can still vary the size of line, but you know that you've got that smaller pen, so it's giving you a lighter impact, and you can get more lines into your squares and they become more detailed. And of course this would work with any kind of pattern. You know, if you were much more into doing spiral-y kind of patterns, you could do smooth roundy spirals instead. It's just that I've decided to go for this geometric line, or more sort of jaggedy lines, just because the stairs are kind of all straight and I've got straight edges. I mean, that's as far as my intellectual journey on that one went. Stairs are straight edge, let's do some straightish patterns. But I think again it does help to contrast with this sort of whirly underwater section, which seems to be sort of leaking into the bottom here. And then this one, I've got a nice dark centre in there, so I can bring all my lines into that section. And that just gives that a different kind of flow. And we're nearly all the way round to where we started, because we nearly got all the way round to this bit here. And we'll just get these last few in. And when I get to the ones down the end, I really want to put more lines in them so that they are close together and they become darker, because that's going to really help to give shadow and to make it feel like we're dropping down into the depths. So if you think you need to do more lines, you can do some, you can go back later and add more in. You know, it doesn't have to be a done deal. You can, if you look back at it, you can decide that you need to get some more tone in. So then you can go back and draw in some more lines to sort of amp up the contrast, because it's the contrast with these sort of shadows that are going to get this to disappear around. I'm into the really small sections now, so it's just fitting my lines in, pulling them close together, and as much as possible getting them to follow the same kind of parameters as the ones above, but you see, keeping them nice and close together, and they start to become darker looking and in comparison to the ones on top. And then hopefully we get this one here that's going to come right underneath. It's going to bring the eye underneath. These have got to pack in really tightly and become almost like a completely dark square, so that that's going to disappear underneath the one above. So by having these kind of squares first, this kind of grid, we've managed to kind of, hopefully, if I pull back a bit, you can see there's that transition from up here where it's much lighter and brighter, coming all the way down to kind of being drawn down. And if we get some more lines into this section here, hang on, just twisting my camera. It's got a very stiff sort of like, it is flexible, but you have to give it some welly to get it to bend the way you want it to. Come on. There we go. Wrestling it in together I am. So again, we can just bring, and if you fan these slightly into that edge so that they're slightly wider, and then moving in underneath that edge each time, that helps to draw the eye down and under like that. Just helps it get that feeling that this is disappearing underneath this top section, because we've got this sort of sense of direction and we've got colours. And hopefully you can see these are really, it's literally just simple lines. It's not complicated patterns. If you feel like doing loads of complicated spiral patterns, you absolutely could. You know, you could fit flower patterns into these shapes, so they were kind of like a descending stair of patchwork. But you can also see how just doing this simple repeated rhythmic line is really effective to kind of draw this down into this space, that it, and you get into a nice rhythm of doing it, and then you're not thinking about anything too complicated. You're just bringing this line and getting this sense of shadow. And if you've worked out your kind of grid squares in this pattern beforehand, then you don't have to keep thinking, well, what size am I doing these lines? You know, you've got your little box that you're working into, that you can just bring your pattern into, just do one little box at a time. And we're just getting that sense of it pouring down. Do a few more along here, and then hopefully when I pull the camera back, we should really see, with this extra darkness on this edge, we should really see this flow and this sense of things moving and overlapping. And I can do a few more above as well, just to kind of enhance that. And of course you can completely go in and do colours as well in between these lines to change that journey again as the lines work down. And you know, it'd be lovely to do. We'll have a look at that. And we've got to think about the banister as well. That'll be the one that I think about next, I think. So I'll just do a few more of these tightly packed in together. And I always think of that artist MC Escher when I'm doing staircases and all his impossible, there's impossible staircases. It'd be wonderful to try and do this on this, to try and follow them through. That would be quite the puzzle to kind of work out. But it's very, I've actually tried to out of interest to try and copy some of his, drawing, to see if I could, not that I'm, obviously totally referencing him, but it's almost impossible, I find, to go against the perspective, to take the line where it wouldn't go in real life. It's really hard. It's almost like trying to sort of draw by looking in a mirror or somehow, so everything feels like it's reversed. It's odd. So if I just do a few more lines there, and then when we pull back out again, you can see how by darkening off that edge, we're starting to get... this is definitely sort of popping up, isn't it? And this is sort of like sliding under it. So I've got a square here. I can put a few more. That'll be going back to my large pen. And then so we'll get some more movement into this one, just sort of larger size, just so we can really see that contrast. And I want to leave that edge next to the stair quite light, only just a few lines on it, so that we're really getting that moment of darkness and difference. So now if you're want to become totally obsessive with patterning, and I have done some pieces where I've looked back and thought, what on earth were you thinking that you did this? But it can work. It depends how much time you want to give to it. I think there is a sort of level of line making, and you keep on adding the lines in, and it does become, quite breathtaking, although it's still quite simple. But what I have done in the past is where I've got these sort of lines to work among, particularly on the larger size, and you can do it down to here, but you take a smaller pen and then you can get some chevron patterns kind of going into these lines. So that is patterns that come as diagonals through here, and that gives you another kind of dimension to play with, and you can kind of fan them along these lines. And it's again this sort of infinite building and infinite dividing of space and creating little areas to work in. So we start off with the large brush stroke and we go smaller and smaller, and we work these through, and every time we think, oh well, we can't do any more on this, and then we think, oh actually look, I can subdivide these ones, and suddenly these areas here look relatively large, don't they? They don't look like tiny little things that are insignificant. They start to add another kind of layer of texture and kind of brokenness, and they start to feel like rock faces. I do a lot of I've recently done quite a few rock face and sort of seascape inspired pieces, and I use these along with sort of semi-naturalistic details, and I use this kind of technique to describe rock. So imagining sort of cliffs where they sort of are all cracking, and all these sort of granite lines coming through, and I find it works really well. It's but you have to kind of keep not, it's quite hard, you have to keep not making them join up, because then they don't, if you make them join up, then they do start to look too much like a fishing net or a spider web or something. But if you just let them so that they break, so that each time they're not touching the bits on the line before, then it keeps the sort of, it gives them their own individuality and their own kind of energy. But yes, so you can then go back and do this sort of in them as well. And again, it seems crazy, but it's just this simple application of a repeated line. So it's not quite as mad, and it's surprising how quickly it builds up. And then you think, oh, well, can I carry that through to the very end of the piece where I've got these really tiny lines? And this is when your tiny micro pens come in, and you are totally at liberty to let these bits, if you wanted to add them in, to let them fade out at some point round here when you've had enough. But to prove that you can go into your, if I zoom into my sort of tiny details section, if my camera's going to bend that way to let me, there we go. And then if I then get the smallest pen you can sort of sensibly buy, is a 0.03, which is just over a millimetre in diameter. And yes, you can go into these sections here and you can do some tiny little chevrons, carrying that all the way through. And if you want a project for the summer to keep you going, you might just get this done by September. I don't know. It's surprisingly, it's not actually, doesn't take as long as you think, really, because I mean it probably takes about a minute to do each square, and okay, there might be 100 squares, but that's only an hour and a half actually. However, I appreciate this may not be for everyone, but I'll tell you what works really nice in this is if you do some of these chevron lines in a kind of gold or metallic, because then you get these lovely hints of sort of sparkle kind of coming through it, which works really nicely. So, and also again, it's adding tone and it's adding some darkness in, and it's very, very simple to do. It's not a difficult, again, it's not sort of trying to make yourself do fantastically complicated spirals within spirals. It's the simplest kind of form of mark making you can get, just putting a line on a surface, but it's just thinking about giving yourself this pattern to follow, so you go from large to small, which gives the whole piece this sort of direction and definition. I mean, I've seen people do tiny little flowers and creatures and things like this, and hats off to them, but I don't think I could manage that. But I never like to say never. I'd like to have a week, I'm terrible. I'm the sort of person, I'm going to be drawing all day, and then I will stay in the evening. Oh, get to the evening, I can relax now, and I do another drawing that, to pick up my sketch. I can do my relaxing drawings now after a whole day of drawing. I know it's a bit Busman's honeymoon, but yeah, but I think that detail, you can just see it coming through the camera. I will scan it and send it to you because you can just see, but I think it's weird. For me, it's weirdly fascinating, and I quite enjoy doing it. So, and then, you can continue that down and sort of give you an extra dimension. And yes, if you get completely hooked on it, you've given yourself all these chevrons, you can go down the spine of each of these. And look, let's put another row of chevrons in, into that as well. So now that's changing how that looks. Let me just focus on that bit. We can keep going again and again, and they become again more like sort of feathers, or it gives them another kind of edge. And of course, as Simone has demonstrated, you are totally within your legal rights to find a bit you really like, cut a square of it out and just get that bit done so that you can see what it looks like. This is your drawing to play with and take from what you want. And, you don't have to think of every single bit of it as being the perfect finished thing. You can find a bit that's really working for you and just work that until it's finished and put it in a tiny frame, and then people will still kind of go, oh my goodness, how have you done that? It looks so intricate. So yes, you can see just bringing in those extra more chevrons inside chevrons. And I think because you don't have to come up with something really complicated, and you know what you're doing to draw each time, although it's quite repetitive, I find that quite sort of relaxing because I'm not having to make big design decisions. So I think that's what I mean by my kind of relaxing drawing. I can just put marks on, and I know exactly what mark I'm doing each time. I'm just deciding whether I'm going to go left or right, really, and I can just about manage that at the end of the day. And that starts to build up, and it doesn't take that long, really, and the sort of the effect it gives you is quite fascinating. It sort of gives it again this sort of like almost crystalline structure. So you don't have to do any of these chevrons if you don't want to, and that's also quite nice because you can do one layer of pattern and then go away and leave it, and it will still look like an interesting image that you've created. And then you might decide just to do a few more, and you can go back to it, and you can go back to it, and you can go back to it. So they are sort of like things that develop and evolve with you, and they don't have to have a deadline. They don't have to sort of stop at any point. You can go back and consider them, and then if you find a technique on a different one that you like, you can come and try it on this one. So I'm not going to do all of these, but you can see that just gives me another kind of dimension of pattern moving in here. And because I'm controlling it with this sort of grid, with this flow through the piece, I know that but I can commit the time to putting this detail in, because I know that I'm controlling where it's going, and I know that at the end of the day it's going to all contribute towards what I'm doing. It's not going to just be pattern for pattern's sake, or sort of doodling for, which there's nothing wrong with that, but for this piece it's going to have this movement that's going to come round here, and it's going to keep on doing its job. So the final thing I want to look at is the sort of what we might do with the banister. And I think it's quite important. I want to make this look quite different to these. So I don't want to do anything too geometric. I don't want to do anything too swirly. So I think really this one leaves me, I'm going to be doing some circles that kind of fit into here and kind of move in round, just to make this almost like a border and let it become something completely different from the other things that are going on. It doesn't mean that I'm still not going to, I think, ignore the passage of space and time that we've got here. So down this bottom end, they're going to be more tightly packed circles and quite dark, with quite dark edges to kind of give that a bit more depth. And then as it moves up, and what I'm doing here is I'm kind of almost going to do the reverse of where I was using the heavier pen in the sort of high up sections to keep it, because it's closer. I'm going to use the darker pens in this, the heavier pen, thicker pen down here, because when I drew my circles, it's going to automatically give me more shadow and more light. And then as I come round, I'm going to go down the scale of pen so that the circles are still there, but they're much lighter in feel, just to go with that movement that we've got going through the whole of this. So I think it's I think you can still see kind of where we started with the staircase, but it's very much, maybe gone into a place that you wouldn't have thought of, but it definitely is still about stairs, isn't it? It's still about this journey downwards into the beyond, or whatever we're calling it, into the well, or the other way of looking at it is of coming up. So where I've got here, I've got quite deep dark pen to give these circles lots of body and lots of shadow again. So then if I come up, if I can stretch up to the section up here, I can then swap to a much thinner pen and larger circles, and they just become lighter in feel, and I can continue with that sense of depth, with that journey from one level to another. And you can do a similar idea. You don't have to do this sort of geometric form. I mean, obviously we've based it very much on stairwells today, so that's why we've chosen quite geometric lines. But you could do a big snail shell kind of spiral with loads of lovely colours whooshing down into the centre, and then tackle it in a similar kind of way. Think about like a cross section from an ammonite or something like that, where you see those lovely spirals kind of going down, and all that crystalline sort of attractive sparkle happening, going down and down and down. And it's just pacing your patterns inside your paint mark so that they are following the rhythm that you've got with that spiral going down. So you can do all sorts of spirals. They don't have to be square at all. They can have that much more organic kind of feel to them. So again, just by putting that lighter pen like there, then the circles are going to match. You can sort of see visually they're connected, but they're much lighter here and they're darker here. So, and then I think with our sort of well, I'm quite happy with how that's sort of looking. I think I might just keep on adding some line work into it, just to kind of give it this sort of swirliness. Just kind of echoing those shapes inside, and just letting my pen just follow round and flow round, and each little time I get a circle I can go in and draw around it and wiggle my line round, just to kind of follow the shape that's there. So it's sort of going into spirals and little islets. I mean, like the island, baby islands, not as in shoe islets, but just sort of filling those little spaces in. Just keep moving it down and round, and remember that it's disappearing off into the depths, and like along here. And just be aware that the lines don't match up again, because by matching up, then you kind of link the distance, the top layer, with the bottom layer, and it kind of like spoils the illusion a bit. So just have to keep just checking that your lines end up not touching the ones above, and that's kind of all you have to think about, really. So how we find that, was anybody want to ask about different parts of it or where they might take it, another bit you might want to look at before we have to draw to a close? Well, as I keep thinking, it's sort of like we're not trying to reproduce stairs, thank goodness, because even I would assure you I would find that quite a challenge. And I think there's there'll be an architectural technician out there who can draw that beautifully. That is not me. But I don't think you don't have to sort of shy away from. I love architecture, some beautiful buildings and things, and I think you can see how you can still draw kind of inspiration from some aspects of them. You don't have to think, oh, I've got to draw all the windows in. But though I'm quite big, I do quite a lot of building drawings, and I just like doing them wobbly. I do like, I just exaggerate all the angles and don't try and make them fit together, and just make them look like crazy houses, and then nobody knows that I can't actually make them join up properly. It's fine, because everyone goes, oh, that's a really cool and interpretation of that, and I go, yeah, it's great. So if you can't draw straight lines, don't try. I think go for, make them wobbly and celebrate the wobbliness. I'll have to absolutely. Because sometimes I think, there's some wonderful artists out there who do these incredibly accurate, beautiful drawings, and they are breathtaking, and I would never take anything away from that skill, and I totally see why you want to do that. But on the other hand, there's also people that create really expressionistic, great big slabs of paint to represent the layers of the buildings, and somehow when they finish the work, what you see is there's something to do with the soul of the place and the liveliness and the people and the busyness and the sound of the traffic, and that's somehow captured in the marks, and no one sort of says, oh, but that building's a bit wobbly, but because we know that this is what I'm always sort of saying to people, it's not about, if we have beautiful photographs and they're great, but we're not trying to reproduce them, because what's the point? Because we have them, but I think what art does, what things do, is they just make you see more than sometimes photographs can capture, or they make you think about what you're looking at and what the artist feels about it and what you feel about it. It's that extra dimension that's what art gives you, and I think what it should be about. So I think this is all about folding down and travelling down in the same way as the stairs are all about that too, but it doesn't have the practical somewhere to keep the umbrellas dry and not slip on the floor kind of aspect that real stairs have, is I guess what I feel. So I hope that you've seen somewhere you can go with this, and somewhere that you can draw, and that the stairs are less frightening now than when we started. But you can see it's just because we put these lines first, almost like drawing us a grid, and that was the most, in essence, that's the most technical bit, isn't it? It's just getting those lines down, and that was actually, it's just the rays first and the lines travelling down, and then we've got something so that we don't have to keep, oh, is that the right side? Is that like, where you're going, you're just fitting your pattern into each of these little units, and as they go down, they are naturally getting smaller and smaller, and your designs get smaller, and then that continues that movement throughout the whole thing. And I wish I had another 3 hours today just to finish all of that. but not, alas. But I will find some time one day to kind of keep that moving down, because I'm really enjoying that, and I really like the way it's sort of folding around, and I hope you've enjoyed it too.